Some games launch and instantly take over the internet. Everyone talks about them, streams them, and calls them masterpieces from day one. But then there are other games that quietly slip under the radar. Not because they're bad and not because they lack creativity, but because they were held back by poor marketing, terrible release timing, or reviews that judge them far too harshly. Today, we're talking about 6 underrated games that deserve so much more attention than they got. If you haven't played any of these yet, you might want to rethink your backlog. So, if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and let's get started. The first game on our list is Ryse: Son of Rome. I'll be honest, when I first saw it, I dismissed it with the same sentence almost everyone used. It's just a graphics showcase. And looking back, that statement did this game a huge disservice. Once you actually sit down and play it, you begin to appreciate what it was trying to do. Ryse throws you into a brutal Roman epic filled with revenge, betrayal, massive battles, and the kind of speeches that make you feel like you're fighting in the middle of a legendary historical war. You play as Marius Titus, a Roman soldier whose entire life falls apart after his family is murdered. From that moment on, his journey becomes one of vengeance, climbing through the ranks of the Roman army while uncovering conspiracies along the way. Now, is it the deepest story ever written? Not really. It isn't trying to deliver some philosophical masterpiece, but it perfectly fits the tone of the game. Everything works together to create an epic atmosphere. The armor, the swords, the sound of marching soldiers, the huge battles, and even the soundtrack. It all makes you feel like you're inside a grand Roman war movie. The combat was one of the biggest criticisms people had. It's simple, and yes, it can become repetitive, but at the same time, it's incredibly satisfying. Blocking attacks, landing heavy sword strikes, and finishing enemies with cinematic executions gives every fight a real sense of weight and impact. The biggest problem was the timing of its release. Ryse launched alongside the Xbox One, and everyone was obsessed with seeing what the next generation of hardware could do. Because of that, many people wrote it off as nothing more than a flashy tech demo. But if you go back and play it today, you'll probably discover a well-crafted action game, especially if you're into historical settings. Sure, it has its flaws, but the atmosphere, presentation, music, and large-scale battles make it a game that's absolutely worth giving a chance. Now let's move on to another game that was overlooked for a completely different reason: Mad Max. The moment people heard the name, most of them instantly connected it to the movie franchise. And honestly, that was part of the problem. A lot of players assumed it would be another cheap movie tie-in game made just to cash in on the brand. But the reality was the exact opposite. Mad Max drops you into a brutal wasteland filled with dust, abandoned ruins, ruthless gangs, and endless stretches of lifeless desert. What surprised me the most was how the game turned that emptiness into one of its greatest strengths. You're not exploring a map overloaded with icons and meaningless side quests. Instead, you're simply trying to survive. Every piece of scrap metal matters. Every drop of fuel counts. Every upgrade you unlock makes you feel a little more capable of surviving this harsh world. And at the center of it all is your car, the magnum opus. It almost feels like a second protagonist. You upgrade it piece by piece, adding stronger armor, deadlier weapons, and more powerful engines. Every modification has a noticeable impact, making the vehicle feel like a reflection of your progress. Whether you're chasing enemy convoys through massive sandstorms or smashing into raider vehicles and scavenging the wreckage afterward, the car combat is ridiculously fun. But the gameplay isn't limited to driving. There's also satisfying hand-to-hand combat with heavy hits, brutal finishers, and a real sense of aggression that perfectly matches Max's character. The game creates a great balance between vehicular combat, exploration, clearing enemy camps, fighting bosses, and gathering resources. It offers far more depth than most people expected. And yet, it was buried. Why? Because Mad Max launched on the exact same day as Metal Gear Solid 5. The Phantom Pain, one of the most anticipated games of the entire year. Against a giant like that, it never really stood a chance. If Mad Max was overlooked because of its release date, then Sleeping Dogs suffered from something even worse. People judged it before they ever played it. The moment players saw an open world, crime, and cars, they immediately called it a GTA clone. Oh, so it's basically GTA, but in Hong Kong? And honestly, that one sentence did this game a massive injustice because Sleeping Dogs never tried to be GTA. It had its own identity from the very beginning. You step into the shoes of Wei Shen, an undercover cop, infiltrating one of Hong Kong's most dangerous triad organizations. And from the moment the game starts, you can feel the difference. The crowded streets, the neon lights reflecting off the rain-soaked roads, the narrow alleyways, the packed food stalls, and the people walking around the city all make Hong Kong feel alive. It's not just an open-world map. It's a place that feels authentic, almost like you're inside a classic Hong Kong action movie. But what truly sets Sleeping Dogs apart is its combat. Unlike most crime games that focus heavily on gunplay, Sleeping Dogs makes hand-to-hand combat the star of the show. And it's unbelievably satisfying. The counters, the combos, and the environmental takedowns let you slam enemies into walls, throw them onto tables, or use whatever's around you to finish the fight. Every brawl feels fast, brutal, and cinematic. It's the kind of game where you can take all the stress from your real life and unleash it in a street fight. The story is also much deeper than people expected. Wei Shen isn't just some random undercover cop. He's a Chinese-American officer returning to Hong Kong, a city he already has a history with. Many of the people inside the triads were once a part of his life before he joined the police. And that's where the real conflict begins. The deeper he gets into the criminal organization, the harder it becomes to separate his duty as a cop from the friendships and relationships he's building with the very people he's supposed to take down. He's meant to gather evidence and help the police destroy the gang, but at the same time, he's living among them, fighting beside them, and slowly becoming one of them. So why was it overlooked? Because people judged it based on appearances? They saw an open-world crime game and instantly labeled it a GTA copy without giving it a real chance. The sad part is that Sleeping Dogs turned out to be an incredible game, but it never had a massive franchise or a huge brand name behind it to protect it. Even today, a proper remake or remaster with modern graphics and strong marketing could easily bring this masterpiece back into the spotlight. Next up is a game that a lot of people dismissed the moment they looked at it: Days Gone. Most players saw the trailers and thought, another open world zombie game? We've seen this 100 times already. A biker, a motorcycle, infected creatures, side missions. Many people made up their minds before even touching the game. But Days Gone isn't a game that shows all of its strengths in the first hour. It's the kind of experience that slowly grows on you the more time you spend with it. You play as Deacon St. John, a drifter trying to survive in a world that has collapsed after a deadly outbreak transformed much of humanity into terrifying creatures known as freakers. But Deacon isn't some superhero trying to save the world. He's a broken man, still haunted by the loss of the person he loved most, his wife, Sarah. Ever since they were separated, he's been trapped between the past and the present, unable to move on from the moment his life fell apart. What really helps Days Gone stand out from other zombie games is the horde system. The first time you come face to face with a massive horde, you realize you're not fighting a few zombies. You're trying to survive against an unstoppable wave of hundreds of infected charging straight at you. If you're not prepared, you'll be overwhelmed in seconds. That's where the game transforms into something special. It's no longer just about shooting enemies. It's about planning ahead, setting traps, finding escape routes, managing your resources, and figuring out how to outsmart a force that's much stronger than you. But the game's biggest strength isn't just the hordes, it's the atmosphere. As you ride your motorcycle through empty roads and abandoned forests, the world genuinely feels dead. The bike itself becomes one of the most important parts of the experience. You repair it, upgrade it, and rely on it for survival. And Deacon himself isn't portrayed as an invincible action hero. He's exhausted, emotionally damaged, and simply trying to find a reason to keep going. Days Gone does an amazing job of making you feel loneliness, fear, and uncertainty. And as the story unfolds, one question keeps pushing you forward. What really happened to Sarah? Is she still alive? The biggest reason the game was overlooked is that it launched at a time when many players were already burned out on zombie games. On top of that, its opening hours are slower than most people expected, causing many to quit before the story and gameplay truly opened up. But the deeper you get into Days Gone, the more you realize it deserved far more appreciation than it received. And honestly, it's one of those games that leaves you wishing it had gotten a sequel. After Days Gone, let's move on to a game that wasn't overlooked because it was bad, but because it had to live in the shadow of its predecessor, The Evil Within 2. The first game was extremely bold. It had a very specific style of horror, brutal, punishing, and constantly pushing players to their limits. With legendary creator Shinji Mikami behind the project, many people expected a pure survival horror experience similar to the early Resident Evil games. Some players loved that unforgiving design, while others felt the game was simply too harsh. And because of that, when The Evil Within 2 was released, a lot of people never even gave it a chance. They assumed it would be more of the same. Ironically, the sequel improved almost everything. The story brings back Sebastian Castellanos, a detective who has been emotionally destroyed by the events of the first game. After losing his family and watching his life fall apart, he gets one final chance, the possibility that his daughter, Lily, might still be alive. To save her, Sebastian willingly steps back into another nightmare. And that's what makes The Evil Within 2 so interesting. The horror doesn't come only from the monsters. It comes from guilt, grief, and the fear of losing the people you love. The game constantly plays with those emotions. Most of the adventure takes place inside a twisted world called Union. On the surface, it looks like an ordinary American town, but underneath, it's a broken psychological landscape. Empty streets, silent houses, and an overwhelming sense that something is deeply wrong create an atmosphere that's both unsettling and unforgettable. Unlike the first game, the sequel introduces larger, semi-open environments. You're free to explore neighborhoods, search abandoned houses, collect ammunition, craft supplies, and decide whether to avoid enemies or confront them. That freedom adds a whole new layer to the survival horror experience because you're not simply walking through narrow corridors. You're trying to survive inside a living nightmare. So why didn't more people play it? Part of the reason is that many players were still divided over the first game and weren't excited about returning to the series. At the same time, horror fans constantly compared it to giants like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but The Evil Within 2 carved out its own identity. It leaned more heavily into psychological horror, told an emotional story about a father trying to save his daughter, and blended survival mechanics with semi-open world exploration in a way that felt unique. It's one of the best horror games of its generation, and it deserves far more recognition than it got. And finally, we leave behind psychological horror and move into a different kind of fear, one that's quieter, slower, but in many ways even more heartbreaking. A Plague Tale. Requiem isn't a game that tries to scare you every second. Instead, it places you in a beautiful world that slowly reveals just how cruel and broken it really is. At first glance, some people reduce it to the game with all the rats. But anyone who's actually played it knows the rats are only part of the story. They're not the heart of the game, they're the nightmare surrounding it. At its core, this is the story of Amicia and her younger brother, Hugo. Amicia is just a young girl forced to carry responsibilities far beyond her age, while Hugo is an innocent child that the world sees as a curse, someone dangerous, someone who needs to be eliminated. From that point on, the game becomes about much more than survival. It's about how far someone is willing to go to protect the last person they have left. Requiem continues the story after the first game and shows just how much Amicia has changed. She's no longer the frightened girl who only wanted to escape. She's become stronger, harsher, and more willing to use violence if it means keeping Hugo safe. The love she has for her brother is her greatest strength, but it's also the thing that's slowly destroying her. Every enemy she kills, every terrible choice she makes, every time she's forced to fight instead of run, you can feel her losing a part of herself. That's what makes the story hit so hard. It's not just about surviving in a cruel world, it's about watching someone sacrifice their innocence piece by piece to save the person they love most. Visually, the game is absolutely stunning. The environments are gorgeous, filled with breathtaking landscapes and incredible attention to detail. But that beauty is deceptive. The moment you start to feel hope, the game reminds you how fragile everything is. Peace turns into chaos and beautiful cities become living nightmares. The gameplay also evolves beyond the first title. You have more tools, more ways to approach situations, and more freedom to choose between stealth and direct confrontation. But the game never treats violence as something exciting. Instead, it makes every brutal decision feel like another step in Amicia's emotional collapse. That's why A Plague Tale: Requiem stands out. It doesn't try to be the biggest game ever made. It focuses on emotion, family, fear, guilt, and sacrifice. It's a story about two siblings trapped in a world that refuses to show them mercy. And by the time the credits roll, you don't just feel like you finished a game, you feel like you've been through their journey alongside them. Outro. So yeah, maybe none of these games were perfect. Every single one of them had flaws, and maybe that's part of why they were misunderstood, but at the same time, each of them offers something unique and memorable that makes them worth experiencing. Sometimes a game just needs the right timing, or maybe it simply needs players willing to look past the reviews and comparisons and give it a real chance. If you've never played one of these titles, I genuinely recommend checking them out. And now I want to hear from you. What's the most underrated game you've ever played that you think deserved so much more love? Leave your answer in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.